Welcome back to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. And today's album is Sometime in New York City. I recently walked into a friend's house and I was listening to Walls and Bridges on my CD player. And he asked what I was doing, whether the CD player was real, because there are losers in the world who only listen to music online. And I said, I'm listening to John Lennon's Walls and Bridges. And he said, awesome, that must be the best John Lennon solo album. And I kind of blanked because I haven't honestly listened to all the John Lennon solo albums. So I guess that's going to be a project now. I'm going to listen to this one, going to listen to Mind Games, and I guess that leaves Double Fantasy and Milk and Honey. I can certainly believe that Walls and Bridges is in some sense the best John Lennon solo album, and in that it's the one where he focused most directly on just writing good songs, good song craftsmanship. And though I had my criticisms, it was clear he was following the basic rules of songwriting and made some beautiful songs. When it came to the earlier records, Plastic Ono Band and Imagine, sometimes it felt like lyrics were a bit too minimal. Sometimes it felt like he was prioritizing messaging over actually getting something to come out that was a song. And Sometime in New York City could be the epitome of that. While Plastic Ono Band and Imagine were engaged vaguely in calls for peace, for living a life of love, this is John Lennon and Yoko Ono's overt political album. And I have to say John Lennon and Yoko Ono overtly for this, because while Yoko Ono was an important behind the scenes inspiration on the first two albums, with this album, she's there singing along on every track, if not being the only singer. And it's clear that her style of poetry is behind these songs. The opening track on this album is the most famous one. Woman is the N-word of the world. This is something that Yoko Ono had said, and it's believed to be derived from Zora Neale Hurston's novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. It's basically a feminist song calling on men to realize the casual ways in which women are subjected to men, that they're called on to perform beauty while judged for their sexuality, that they're expected to stay at home and not thrive as individuals. Now, needless to say, because our culture has come to the conclusion that the history behind the N-word means saying it in any context, even if you're just quoting someone else, saying it is flat out bad. This is obviously a song that is hard to have a legacy today. I guess one of my frustrations with the style of political correctness of our current movement is it often feels like a series of rules rather than a call for people to engage more deeply with why things are problematic. So I could certainly see why someone does not like the analogy between race-based oppression and gender-based oppression. People of a race have children who are also of the race and sort of pass on the struggle from generation to generation, whereas any child has an equal chance of being male or female. And so therefore, the experience of upper class, middle class, various classes of women are all going to be very different from each other. Whereas with sort of racial oppressions, you're going to have a greater proportion of the group, I guess, clustered around the same oppression. And beyond that, you could talk about the problematic ways in which gendered oppression is pitted against racial oppression, whether it was white women using their fragility to lead to the horrible deaths of people like Emmett Till, whether it was the use of feminist rhetoric to justify things like the war in Afghanistan, whether it's fairly right-wing women like Hillary Clinton or Margaret Thatcher getting to power and implementing right-wing agendas, while, at least in Clinton's case, using the feminist card to obscure their more problematic views. There's certainly a conversation to be had about this title, but at the same time, some of the specificity and the quality of that discussion is lost by the fact that now people just look at that title and say, John and Yoko don't get to use that word. I'm writing off the song altogether. And I think one further point to be said there, because when John and Yoko used this word, the rule around it wasn't as absolute. They got to articulate why they were doing it. And the 60s and 70s were more of a time of solidarity, of socialist-inspired movements. So the idea of comparing struggles, even if the comparison wasn't one-to-one, was seen as more okay. The broader point that we should try and connect the dots between our struggles and see ourselves as a 99% with a shared cause against capitalism, against war. I feel like that's a better world than the neoliberal world we have now, where individual groups get to talk about their individual struggles, but they're almost discouraged from uniting those struggles into a shared anti-capitalist cause. Anyway, musically, it is a well-produced song, and that's kind of the unifying theme of this record, that Phil Spector's production, he fills out the sound so nicely. It's a big sound, but it never is quite over the top. And that's absolutely true of track 2, Sister Oh Sister, where other than a fun spoken introduction between John and Yoko, this is just all Yoko singing, and it comes across as a kind of doo-wop-y sound. It also reminds me of the music from Schoolhouse Rock, 1970s sweetness. And for those who've never heard Yoko Ono sing before, obviously she's singing in her second language, so sometimes the accent can be a bit heavy, and more prominently, she's not a natural singer. She sometimes struggles to say in key, and on some songs that can be very frustrating, but in Sister Oh Sister, it's tied together very nicely, where once you're used to the idiosyncrasy of her voice, I actually think it's pretty beautiful. Track 3 shakes up the sound a bit. It's bluesier, it's grittier. It's called Attica State, and this is John and Yoko singing in solidarity with prisoners, both of Attica State and prison in particular, where there'd recently been a rebellion, and it ended up with guards shooting at prisoners, and 43 people, mostly prisoners, were killed. The key line in the song is Attica State, we're all mates with Attica State. So again, the vision of John and Yoko is trying to imagine a solidarity that is wide as possible, which is why, for better or for worse, they were comfortable with that controversial analogy on the first song. It wasn't about putting one group down, belittling one group's struggle, but trying to call on people from all places to participate in a genuine leftist struggle for universal freedom. Track number 4 continues the prison abolitionist theme, though from a more abstract place. It's called Born in a Prison. In this song, Yoko Ono again shows her and John's comfort with broad analogies, saying that, society is full of prisons in the sense of institutions that try and confine us and control us. So she says in our society, schools, unfortunately, they're more like prisons than institutions of liberation. The standout thing of this song are the metaphors from the chorus, which kind of remind me of Yoko's modern art piece called Meant Piece. Wood becomes a flute when it's loved. Mirror becomes a razor when it's broken. Her art gallery, Yoko literally calls on you to take found objects and find new meaning on them. And here she's using metaphorically to say, if we had a world where we loved prisoners rather than putting them down, they could go on to have very different futures. Track number 5 brings John back into focus. It's called New York City. Initially, I wanted to dismiss this one as just John Lennon doing another blues jam. Again, blues jams can be fun to do, but they can be kind of boring to listen to. And John's voice here sounds a bit gritty, so you have to listen to it a couple times before you can really hear the lyrics. But eventually the song did win me over. It has a bit more than a blues sound to it. There's some saxophone to it, and there's something about that combination of blues electric guitar plus saxophone equals New York. The Chuck Berry sound to it kind of makes it a sequel to the Beatles song, The Ballad of John and Yoko. And John just tries to capture the overall moment in his life, combining quirks in New York culture with some illusions, countercultural thoughts and experiences. The next couple songs are dedicated to the Irish liberation struggle. Sunday Bloody Sunday has fairly solid lyrics, and it also uses Yoko's voice in a way that sounds kind of metal. Track 7, Luck of the Irish, goes for a bit more of a gimmicky, kitschy Irish folk music sound, but Phil Spector does a great job of creating that sound. Track number 8 is called John Sinclair. This was about a man being sentenced to 10 years in prison, I believe, for accidentally selling joints to an undercover cop. This one has a very different sound. It's very slide guitar based. I don't want to say it's trying to sound like Woody Guthrie, but it does feel Woody Guthrie adjacent, and the lyrics are very well written. So the reason why I say the lyrics are well written on songs like Sunday Bloody Sunday and John St. Clair is because on some of the tracks, they're really not well written. Track number 9 is called Angela. It's a song I really want to like because Angela Davis is one of the sort of founders of the idea of prison abolition. is a big hero of mine. This song would have been written in solidarity with the movement to call her from being freed from prison. She was accused and ultimately acquitted of providing guns to a prison escape by George Jackson. And continuing with the anti-prison, pro-freedom message of the early songs, John and Yoko framed their support for Angela Davis as part of a broader support for freedom of all kinds of prisoners around the world. Now, again, Phil Spector's production makes the song sound great, but if you look at the lyrics or listen to them closely, they get very frustrating. For example, Angela, can you hear the earth is turning? When you're writing lyrics, you want them to rhythmically fit the melody. So it should be, Angela, can you hear the earth turning? Not, Angela, can you hear the earth is turning? Or, Angela, you soon will be returning. It should be, Angela, you soon will return. And my sense with some of these songs where the lyrics are off is basically Yoko Ono wrote her poems, and John said, well, wouldn't it be nice, Yoko, if we turned your poems into songs? And then John didn't say, hey, Yoko, a thing with songwriting is you have to actually make your poems have the right amount of syllable. You can't just use any sentence you want. It has to sound melodic. And it was like, no, let's just use your poems the way they are. And as a result, a bunch of the tracks on here just sound like poems put to music, and they don't quite sound like songs. And again, thankfully, the excellent production, the excellent backing instruments fix that. But it's frustrating. It's like, you have these great songs, these great messages. Why can't you just write them so they actually sound like good songs? So it wouldn't take very big changes at all. And track 10 is entirely Yoko Ono. It's called We're All Water, and it's a message about human universality. You know, we're all the same if you look under our skin. And the bad rhythm problem with the lyrics, again, continues. But again, it ends up being a fun sounding song, and Yoko brings in a kind of nice little dolphin giggle at the end of the piece. So overall, this song is a nice little collection of different political thoughts: prison liberation, Angela Davis and the Black liberation struggle, the Irish liberation struggle against the war on drugs, celebrating counterculture in New York City, feminism, of course. It's a great collection of stuff here. The music sounds great, and I think the only problem with it, the lyrics feel underdone, and you don't know why someone with as much songwriting experience as John Lennon had wouldn't think to say, okay, these songs are almost there, let's make the lyrics a little better. But that's really the only problem with here. If you just pop this into the player and listen to this, it sounds great. And getting to see John Lennon develop to making all these political statements, which are, you know, far more specific than just the sort of vague liberal virtue signaling we get from celebrities today. Important historical album, pretty good one to listen to. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.